The dirt wasn't even settled on my wife's grave when my son Mark led me into our quiet house. He shut the big oak door, and the silence was colder than the Ohio winter outside. He had his hand on my shoulder, but it didn't feel like a son comforting his father. It felt like a guard leading a prisoner. My name is Arthur, by the way, and I'm 70 years old. This is the story of how my own child tried to destroy me. He walked me into my study, the room where my wife, Helen, used to read for hours. He didn't offer me a glass of water or a warm hug. Instead, he pulled out a stack of papers and dropped them on the desk. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "Dad," he said, his voice flat, "we need to talk about the house." I just stared at him, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. He pushed the papers closer to me. His eyes were like a stranger's, with a hungry look I had never seen before. A fancy pen lay on top of the papers, shining under the lamplight. It looked like a weapon. He wanted something from me, and I had a terrible feeling that he wasn't going to leave this room until he got it. I looked down at the papers. The words at the top were big and scary. Quitclaim deed. I'm not a lawyer, but I know what that means. It means you are giving something away for good. I looked up at my son, Mark, the boy I taught how to ride a bike right in our driveway. "You want me to give you the house?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. All our memories were in these walls. Me and Helen, we planned our whole life here. "It's the smart thing to do, Dad," he said, not even blinking. "You can't take care of this place alone." My mind screamed no. My heart screamed no. But before I could say the word, Mark's face turned to stone. He leaned in close, his voice low and sharp. "You will sign it," he hissed, "or I will make sure you never ever see Chloe again." My blood ran cold. Chloe, my 7-year-old granddaughter, the only light I had left. Was he really going to use an innocent child to take everything from me? Chloe's sweet face flashed in my mind. Her little laugh, the way she holds my hand when we walk in the garden. She has her grandma Helen's eyes. Losing her would be like losing Helen all over again. It would break me into a million pieces. My son, Mark, saw the fight go out of my eyes. He knew he had won. He leaned back with a small, ugly smile. "It's for the best," he said softly. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely hold the pen. Every part of me wanted to throw it at him, to scream until my lungs gave out. But I thought of Chloe. I had to choose her. The ink flowed onto the paper, a black stain that felt like the end of my life. I signed my name and slid the papers back across the desk. Mark snatched them up, his eyes shining with victory. He thought he had just won. He had no clue that my smart, wonderful wife had seen this coming. He didn't know that Helen had already set a trap for him months ago, and he had just walked right into it. The very next morning, the house didn't feel like my own anymore. Mark's wife, Sarah, walked around with a measuring tape and a notepad, her high heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floors. She didn't speak to me. It was like I was a ghost she couldn't see. She would point at the walls and whisper to my son, Mark, about tearing them down. "We can open up this whole space," she said, waving her hand at the living room, the room where we raised him. I sat in Helen's favorite armchair, the one with the soft, worn fabric, and felt my heart ache. Sarah stopped and looked right at the chair, her nose wrinkled up. "That drab thing has to go first," she said. She was talking about the chair my wife sat in every single night, the chair where she read stories to our son. Sarah wasn't just taking a house, she was trying to erase my Helen from the world. I just sat there, quiet, letting her think I was a weak, defeated old man. I had to. I stared out the window at Helen's beautiful rose bushes, and the look on Sarah's face told me that nothing was safe. Not even the living things my wife had planted with her own 2 hands. They started to think I was deaf too. That night I pretended to be asleep in my chair and I heard them whispering in the hallway. Mark and his wife Sarah were talking about money. "How much do you think we can get for it?" Sarah asked. "The bank needs a payment by Friday," Mark replied, his voice tight and scared. They weren't just greedy. They were in some kind of serious trouble. The next day I got the mail before they did. There it was, A bill from a fancy car dealership downtown. My son Mark had bought a brand new expensive SUV. The date on the sale was the day after Helen's funeral. A hot, sick feeling filled my stomach. They didn't just steal my home while I was grieving. They went out and celebrated. I realized this was bigger than I thought. They weren't planning for the future. They were trying to plug a hole in a sinking ship. I slid the letter back into the mailbox right before their car pulled up. I had to know exactly how deep their trouble was because my wife Helen's secret plan depended on it. My granddaughter, Chloe, was the only thing that felt real anymore. She found me in the garden, just staring at the roses. Her little face was full of worry. "Grandpa," she said, holding my hand, "why is Mommy putting yellow stickers on everything?" She held up an old book. It was Helen's favorite, the one she read a dozen times. A little yellow dot was stuck to the cover. I knew what it meant. It meant the item was ready to be sold. How could I explain to a 7-year-old that her parents were selling her grandmother's memories for cash? I couldn't. So I just knelt down and pulled her into a hug, breathing in the smell of her shampoo. "Don't you worry about those stickers, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. I was making a silent promise to her, and to my Helen, that I would protect this house and everything in it. I looked back at the kitchen window and saw Mark and Sarah watching us. They weren't smiling. They were looking at me like I was a problem that still needed to be solved. I woke up one morning to the sounds of strangers in my living room. Heavy footsteps, deep voices. My son's wife, Sarah, had hired men to take our things away. They were putting yellow stickers on everything and carrying our life out the door. I saw them pick up a small wooden music box my wife Helen had owned since she was a little girl. "Wait," I said, my voice cracking. "Not that one." Mark stepped in front of me, blocking my path. He was bigger than me, and his face was a hard mask. "It's just junk, Dad. We're making room," he said, and he actually pushed me back a step. I watched them carry the music box out. My granddaughter, Chloe, loved that box. Helen used to let her wind it up, and a tiny ballerina would spin to a soft tune. Chloe cried when she saw it was gone. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I went on the computer and found the website for the company Sarah had hired. And there it was. A picture of Helen's music box for sale between a rusty lamp and an old tire. It was worth maybe $20 to them. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about money. It was about saving Chloe from a father who would sell her childhood for pocket change. And I realized I couldn't do this alone. Sarah decided my room needed to be organized. That's what she called it. It really meant she wanted to go through my things to see if I had anything valuable hidden. "You never know what old people forget they have," she said with a fake smile. While I was pulling out old sweaters from my drawer, my fingers brushed against a floorboard that was just a little bit loose. I didn't say anything. I just kept working until she got bored and left. That night, when the house was finally dark and quiet, I got a butter knife from the kitchen. I knelt on the cold floor, my old knees aching, and I carefully pried the board up. Underneath was a space, and inside that space was a small leather folder I had never seen in my life. My heart started to beat fast. I opened it up, and inside was a faded picture of Helen when she was a young woman, smiling. Tucked behind it was a thick sealed letter. My name, Arthur, was written on the front in her beautiful handwriting. My hands were shaking as I held it. It was a message from my wife, a secret she had kept from me all these years. I sat on the edge of my bed and carefully opened the envelope. The letter inside was several pages long. The very first line hit me like a punch to the gut. "My dearest Arthur," it began. "If you are reading this, then I fear the worst has happened with our son." My Helen she had known. The letter explained that she found out about Mark's gambling problem a few years ago. She knew he had terrible debts, and that he would see her death as a chance to get money. She wrote about how sorry she was to keep this secret from me. "I didn't want to break your heart, my love," she wrote. "I thought I could fix him." But she knew she couldn't, so she made a plan. The letter didn't have all the details. Instead, it gave me an instruction, a final gift from the woman I loved. It gave me the name and phone number of a lawyer in downtown Columbus, a Mr. Davis. The last line was underlined twice. "Trust him, Arthur," she wrote. "He knows everything." The letter didn't give me a weapon. It gave me a map my Helen had drawn to lead me out of this darkness. The first thing I had to do was make a phone call that would change everything. The next morning, I waited until my son, Mark, and his wife, Sarah, left the house to run some errands. My hands were shaking as I took the letter from its hiding spot. I walked out into the cold garage, my breath making little clouds in the air so I could have some privacy. I looked at the phone number my wife, Helen, had written down. I almost couldn't do it. What if it was all a mistake? But I thought of Chloe, my granddaughter, and I punched in the numbers. The phone rang twice, and a man with a calm, deep voice answered. "Davis Law Office," he said. "Hello," I stammered, my voice sounding weak. "My name is Arthur Holloway. My late wife, Helen. She left me your name." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I thought maybe he had hung up. Then I heard a heavy sigh. "Arthur," the man said, and his voice was full of kindness. "I've been waiting for your call. Helen made me promise me she'd tell you. We have a lot to discuss." He wanted me to come to his office the very next day. The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. "And Arthur," he added, "it is very, very important that your son does not know you are coming." I had to lie to get out of the house. I told Mark I had a doctor's appointment. The whole bus ride downtown, I felt like a spy. Mr. Davis's office was in an old brick building. It was quiet and felt safe. He was an older man, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He didn't waste any time. He walked over to a big iron safe, turned a dial, and pulled out a thick, important-looking document tied with a blue ribbon. "Arthur," he said, laying it on the desk between us. "This is your wife Helen's true last will and testament. She had it signed and notarized 6 months ago." He explained everything. The will left the house, the car, and all of their savings directly to me. It set up a special account called the Chloe Protector Fund for my granddaughter. Then he pointed to one last line. It said that our son, Mark, was to be given exactly $1. "But the papers I signed for him?" I asked, my head spinning. Mr. Davis gave me a small smile. "They're worthless paper, Arthur. The will overrules everything." A huge weight lifted off my shoulders. I wanted to go home and throw them out. But when I said that, Mr. Davis just shook his head. "No," he said gravely. "That's not the plan." "What do you mean, that's not the plan?" I asked Mr. Davis, the lawyer. "The house is mine. I can make my son, Mark, leave right now." Mr. Davis leaned forward, his face serious. "If you do that, he will just find another way to hurt you. He's desperate, Arthur. Your wife knew that." He explained that Helen's plan was much bigger. She didn't just want to stop Mark. She wanted to save him. She knew that for him to ever get better from his gambling, he had to lose everything. He had to hit the very bottom. She wanted him to believe he had won, Mr. Davis explained. She wanted him to have enough rope to hang himself, so to speak. My heart sank. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked. "Just let him and his wife Sarah keep selling our memories?" The lawyer looked me right in the eyes. "For now, yes. You have to go back there and be the sad, broken old man they think you are. You have to let them continue. Can you do that, Arthur? For Helen? For Chloe?" I walked out of that office with the truth locked away in my heart. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the bait in a trap my wife had set. When I walked back into my house, my son Mark and his wife Sarah were in the kitchen. I immediately stooped my shoulders like I was tired. I let my voice get quiet and shaky. I had to become the person they wanted me to be, a weak old man who wouldn't cause any trouble. Sarah looked up from her phone and gave me a fake, sweet smile. "Oh, there you are, Arthur," she said. "We were starting to wonder if you got lost on your little walk." I just nodded and mumbled, "No, dear. Just needed some air." It felt awful to lie, to pretend to be helpless. But every time Sarah looked at me with those cold, greedy eyes, it was like putting another log on a fire inside my heart. I wasn't doing this for me. I was doing this for my wife, Helen, and for my granddaughter, Chloe. That night, as I lay in my bed, I heard Sarah on the phone with one of those estate liquidators, the people who sell your things. "We need to clear out the attic by the end of the week," she said. The attic. That's where Helen kept her beautiful old wedding dress. I knew right then that my performance had to be perfect, and I had to start moving fast. To fight a secret war, I needed secret tools. The next afternoon, I told Mark I was walking to the pharmacy to get a refill for my blood pressure pills. It was a lie. Instead, I walked an extra 10 blocks to a big Walmart. I went to the electronics section and bought the cheapest prepaid phone they had. A burner phone. I paid for it in cash. It felt strange, like something you see in the movies, but it was the only way. I walked to a nearby park and sat on a cold bench, making sure no one was close enough to hear me. I dialed the number for a 24-hour storage facility on the other side of town. A woman with a bored voice answered. "Name for the rental?" she asked. I panicked for a second. I couldn't use my own name. I looked up at the street sign. It said Davis Avenue. It felt like a sign from my wife. "The name is Davis," I said, my voice firm. "Frank Davis." I had a phone they didn't know about and a storage unit they couldn't find. It was a start. But now I had to face the real problem. How do you move a lifetime of memories out of a house when your every move is being watched? That night, the real work began. I waited until I heard Mark and Sarah snoring upstairs. The whole house was dark and creaking. I felt like a thief in my own home. I started small. I went into the study and took down our old photo albums. I wrapped each one in a dish towel and put them at the very bottom of the kitchen trash bag. Then I put the real trash on top of them. As I was tying the bag, a floorboard creaked upstairs. I froze. "Dad? What are you doing up?" It was Mark. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "Just taking out the trash, son," I called back, making my voice sound old and tired. Couldn't sleep. I held my breath until I heard his bedroom door close again. I slipped out the back door into the cold night air. I didn't put the bag in the bin. I carried it, walking 6 blocks to the nearest bus stop. The whole way, I felt like someone was following me. I felt like every car that passed was watching. I slipped back into the house just as the sky was turning a pale gray. Exhausted but successful. But as I locked the door, I glanced across the street. A light was on in my neighbor's window, and I swear I saw the curtain move. Had someone been watching me the whole time? The morning after my first secret trip, I was a bundle of nerves. I was terrified that someone had seen me. I went outside to get the newspaper, and my next-door neighbor, Frank, was standing by his mailbox. Frank is a retired police detective, and he doesn't miss much. He waved at me. "Everything all right over there, Arthur?" He called out, his voice casual. But his eyes were sharp. "See, you're taking up late-night walks now." My heart did a flip. He had seen me. I tried to act normal, to play the part of the confused old man. "Oh, you know, Frank," I said with a shaky laugh. "Just old bones. A man my age can't sleep much, especially since Helen passed." He just nodded slowly, but he didn't smile. The look in his eyes said, "I don't believe you." He knew I was lying. As he walked back to his house, a terrible choice landed on my shoulders. Was my neighbor, a man I'd known for 20 years, a danger to my secret plan? Or was he the one person in the world who could actually help me? Seeing that sharp, knowing look in my neighbor Frank's eyes made me think back. I remembered the first time I knew my son, Mark, had a real problem. He was away at college, and he called home one night sounding desperate. He said he needed $500 for a special textbook, or he would fail his class. My wife, Helen, was so worried she sent him the money the very next morning. A week later, I got a phone call from his roommate. There was no textbook. Mark had lost the money in a poker game and owed some scary people. I wanted to drive right down there and confront him. "We have to teach him a lesson, Helen," I had said. But she was crying. "No, Arthur, please," she begged. "He's a good boy. It was just a mistake. If we get angry, we'll lose him." I went along with it. I let Helen believe that her love could cure him. but it didn't. It just taught our son that he could lie and there would be no consequences. And now, all these years later, I was paying the price for that first mistake. I was suddenly terrified that Mark's wife, Sarah, was about to make everything much, much worse. My son's wife, Sarah, decided she wanted to throw a big party. To show off our new house, she announced, as if I wasn't even in the room. She bought a new, expensive dress and ordered fancy food from a caterer. The day of the party, she treated me like I was the hired help. She had me polishing the good silverware, the silverware she had put a little yellow sticker on just last week. Then she looked at me, her eyes cold as ice. "And Arthur," she said, "when my guests arrive, please just stay in your room. We don't want to make things awkward for everyone." That night, I sat on my bed and listened to the sounds of laughter and music fill my home. I cracked my door open just enough to hear. I heard Sarah talking to one of her friends. "It's a great house," she bragged. "Once we sell off all this old junk and the mortgage goes through, we're putting in a big, beautiful swimming pool." A pool. They were going to dig up my Helen's rose garden, the place she loved most in the world, and fill it with concrete. I closed my door, my heart pounding with a new kind of anger. The clock was ticking, and I knew my next secret trip had to be my biggest one yet. The day after the party, the whole house felt sad and messy. My granddaughter, Chloe, was the saddest of all. She kept walking over to the fireplace mantel, to the empty spot where her Grandma Helen's music box used to be. She was too young to understand that it had been sold for party money. She just knew it was gone. She looked up at me, her big, worried eyes full of tears. "Grandpa," she whispered, "do you think the little ballerina is lonely now?" I had to swallow the lump in my throat. "No, sweetheart," I told her, kneeling down. "She's just on a new adventure." That afternoon, I found an old, empty cedar box in the attic. I gave it to Chloe and told her it was a memory box for Grandma. The first thing we put inside was a single perfect rose petal from the garden. She held the box to her chest and looked up at me, her eyes so serious. "Grandpa," she asked, "are we going to have to put everything in the memory box? Is Daddy going to sell the whole house?" Her simple, terrifying question hung in the air, and I didn't know how to answer it. The next morning, my neighbor Frank was waiting for me by the fence that separated our yards. He wasn't smiling, he got straight to the point. "I was a detective for 30 years, Arthur," he said, his voice low and serious. "I know when someone is scared. I see your son's fancy new car. I saw the estate sale people. And I saw you sneaking out with a trash bag in the middle of the night. Stop lying to me and let me help you." I looked into his steady, honest eyes. I thought about the memory box and Chloe's scary question. I couldn't do this alone anymore, so I told him. I told him everything. About the threat, about the deed I signed, and about my wife Helen's secret will. Frank listened to the whole story without saying a word. When I finished, he just gave a slow nod. "Helen was a good woman," he said, his voice like gravel. "Okay, your secret war just got a new soldier." He looked over at my house, a hard look on his face. "First thing we're gonna do," he said, "is we get some eyes on your son. We're going to put him under surveillance." I had no idea what my neighbor Frank meant by surveillance. The next day, he came over holding a brand new birdhouse. It was a nice one, painted dark green. But then he turned it around. Tucked inside the little hole was a tiny dark camera lens. "Best trick in the book," he said with a grin. "Nobody ever looks twice at a birdhouse." We screwed it onto a big maple tree in his yard. It had a perfect clear view of my front door and my whole driveway. Frank explained it was motion activated and would record to a little card inside. "Your boy Mark won't be able to buy a pizza without us knowing about it," he promised. He also told me he was making some quiet phone calls to old friends of his, asking them to look into Mark's finances. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't just hiding and reacting. I was fighting back. That very night, my secret phone buzzed. It was Frank. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his voice urgent. "A sports car just pulled up. Dropped a small package on your porch for Mark at 2 a.m. The camera got a clear shot of the driver. A cold chill ran down my spine. Who on earth was my son involved with? That mysterious late-night package kept me awake all night. It reminded me of a terrible day a few years ago. I came home from work and found my wife, Helen, sitting at the kitchen table. She was white as a ghost. In front of her were credit card bills, spread out like a fan. But they weren't our credit cards. Our son, Mark, had secretly opened them in Helen's name. The bills were for thousands of dollars from strange websites, online casinos, and cash advance places. When we confronted him, he fell apart. He cried and swore it was a one-time mistake. "I was going to pay it all back, Mom, I swear," he sobbed. "I just got in a little deep. Please, just help me this one last time." And Helen, with her big, soft heart, believed him. She took money from her own savings account, money she had worked so hard for, and she paid off every single penny to give him a clean start. Seeing him now, getting secret packages in the middle of the night, I finally understood. My wife's love hadn't cured him. It had just been a speed bump on his road to ruin. My son was swimming with sharks, and he was trying to drag his whole family down with him. A few days later, my neighbor Frank called me on the secret phone. His voice was low and serious. "Arthur, I've got it," he said. "This is the whole ballgame." Frank had used his old police contacts to do some digging. He found out that my son Mark and his wife Sarah hadn't made a payment on their own house in over 6 months. The bank was taking it back. There was going to be a foreclosure auction to sell their house from under them. "When is it?" I asked, my hand gripping the little phone tightly. 45 days from now," Frank said. "That's their deadline, Arthur. They aren't just trying to get rich off your house. They're trying to keep from becoming homeless themselves." Suddenly, everything made a horrible kind of sense. The rush to sell everything, Sarah's desperate party, Mark's sweaty, nervous face. It wasn't just greed, it was pure panic. They were pretending to be on top of the world while their own house was being taken away. But this new information brought a new kind of fear. With their deadline getting closer every day, what crazy thing would a desperate man like my son do next? I couldn't stop thinking about what Sarah had said on the phone. Clear out the attic by the end of the week. Now I knew why she was in such a hurry. The most precious thing up there was my Helen's old wedding dress, packed away in a big cedar chest. I had to get it out. I called my neighbor Frank on the secret phone and we made a plan. We waited until Friday night, when Mark and Sarah went out for a fancy dinner, probably with money they didn't have. Frank watched from his window. As soon as their car was gone, he called me. "Coast is clear," he whispered. "Go, go, go." My heart pounded as I pulled down the rickety attic stairs. I found the chest, but it was heavier than I remembered. I tied a thick rope around it and with all my strength pushed it toward the attic window. Frank was in the backyard below, guiding it down. We had just loaded it into his pickup truck when my secret phone buzzed. It was Frank. "They're coming back," he hissed, "and get in the truck now." We sped away just as their headlights turned onto our street. At the storage unit, we slid the chest into the cool, dark space. Helen's dress was safe, but I knew our luck couldn't last. They were getting more desperate, and we were running out of things to save. A few days after the attic raid, my son Mark came to me with a big fake smile on his face. He sat down next to me on the sofa, which was a surprise. He and his wife, Sarah, usually acted like I was invisible. "Dad," he said, trying to sound kind, "I know things have been stressful since Mom passed. We were thinking you deserve a break, a vacation." He showed me a glossy brochure with pictures of a sunny beach and a bright blue pool. "It's a free weekend at a resort," he said. "A gift. From us to you." I knew it was a lie. There was a catch. I played along, pretending to be a grateful old man. "Oh, Mark, that's so thoughtful," I said, my voice sounding weak. As soon as he left the room, I called my neighbor Frank on my secret phone. I told him the name of the resort. It took him less than 5 minutes to call me back. "It's a timeshare scam, Arthur," he said, his voice grim. "They get a $200 gift card just for bringing a senior citizen to a high-pressure sales pitch. $200. That's all I was worth to my son. They weren't trying to give me a vacation. They were trying to cash me in like a coupon. My little granddaughter, Chloe, came home from school with a fever. She was coughing and her face was flushed and hot. She just wanted to curl up on the couch and be miserable. My son's wife, Sarah, was annoyed. "Great," she said, sighing as she looked at Chloe. "This ruins our plans for tonight." She didn't even feel Chloe's forehead. She just went upstairs to her room. I, on the other hand, went right into grandpa mode. I made Chloe the same chicken soup my wife, Helen, always used to make when she was sick. I fluffed her pillows and read her a story. I sat by her side for hours, dipping a washcloth in cool water and laying it on her forehead, just like Helen would have done. Later that evening, in a sleepy, feverish voice, Chloe whispered, "Grandpa?" "I'm right here, sweetheart," I said. She snuggled closer and said, "I wish Mommy was more like Grandma." Her simple words broke my heart and filled it with steel at the same time. I knew I couldn't just play defense anymore. It was time for Frank and me to start fighting back. The next morning, I looked out the window and saw that my car was gone. My old reliable sedan, the one Helen and I drove across the country in, had vanished from the driveway. My son, Mark, came into the kitchen, not even looking at me as he poured a cup of coffee. "Where's my car, Mark?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a sip and shrugged. "It's gone, Dad," he said. "Sold it for scrap. The thing was a death trap. I did you a favor." He didn't get any paperwork. He said a guy just paid him in cash. That evening, my neighbor Frank showed me the video from the birdhouse camera. It was all there. It showed a man handing Mark a thick envelope of cash. A few hours later, the camera recorded a delivery man dropping off a small fancy box. And then there was Mark, standing on the porch in the afternoon sun, wearing a brand new, flashy gold watch. He sold our memories for a watch. "We got him," Frank said, his voice a low rumble. "This is hard evidence. This is proof." For the first time, I felt a spark of real power. We weren't just watching anymore, we were building a case. The evidence from the birdhouse camera felt like a weapon. The next day I took the bus to see the lawyer, Mr. Davis. I showed him the pictures of the cash and the watch. He nodded, a grim look on his face, and told me it was time to explain the final part of my wife Helen's plan. He said Helen, who used to be an accountant, was always brilliant with money. Years ago, she had secretly set up a special savings account for our granddaughter, Chloe. It was called a trust fund. It was locked up tight so our son Mark could never touch it. But she put in one very special rule. "Helen was clever, Arthur," Mr. Davis said, tapping the document. "The rule says that if you can prove Mark is being irresponsible with money, then you, as the person in charge of the fund, can use the money it makes each year for Chloe's immediate care." I didn't understand. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," he said with a small smile, "we can get Chloe into a better school, pay for her art classes. Helen made sure you had the power to give her a good life, no matter what Mark did." The video of the car sale wasn't just evidence against my son anymore. It was the key to unlocking Helen's final gift to Chloe. I came home from the lawyer's office feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in a long time. I walked into my bedroom, and it felt like a bucket of ice water had been thrown on me. Sitting on my nightstand right next to my wedding photo of me and Helen was a slick, colored brochure. The front read, "Sunny Meadows Assisted Living." I picked it up with a trembling hand. It was a nursing home, and it wasn't a nice one. The pictures were faded, and the people in them had fake, empty smiles. This was it. This was their whole, cruel plan. First, they take the house. Second, they sell my things. And third, they get rid of me. I wasn't a father to them. I was just one last piece of trash to be taken out before they could move on with their new life. I looked at the smiling fake faces on the cover. They weren't just going to take my home. They were going to throw me away and lock the door. And as I stared at the moving checklist on the back, I realized they planned on doing it very, very soon. My hands were still shaking when I called my neighbor Frank on the secret phone. I told him about the nursing home brochure. There was a long, angry silence on the other end of the line. "Okay, Arthur," he finally said, his voice hard as nails. "That's it. I'm making a final call." He called me back 10 minutes later. "I have the date," he said. My source at the courthouse confirmed it. The bank auction for your son Mark's house is next Friday, exactly 1 week from today. 1 week. That was the deadline. Everything they were doing, the rushing, the selling, the cruelty, it was all because they had 1 week to sell my house to stop from losing their own. I could feel the panic in the air. I heard Mark on the phone with a realtor, almost shouting, "I don't care what you have to do. We need a cash offer and we need it by Thursday." I immediately called the lawyer, Mr. Davis, and told him, "Okay, Arthur," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It's time. I'm preparing the eviction notice. I'm preparing the restraining order." 1 week. That's all that was left. They were racing to find a buyer. And I was an old man, pretending to be weak, just waiting for the perfect moment to say, checkmate. With the clock ticking down, my son Mark and his wife Sarah were in a panic to sell the house. That's when my neighbor Frank's plan went into action. He told me an old police buddy of his was going to pretend to be a rich investor looking to buy a house for cash. The next afternoon, the realtor showed up with a big, tough-looking man. He walked through the house, pointing out imaginary problems and shaking his head. I just sat in my armchair, pretending to be half asleep. Finally, the man turned to Mark. "It needs work," the phony buyer said, "but I can make a cash offer and we can close in 2 days. There's just one thing. My lawyer is a real stickler. He's going to need to see a perfectly clean title search before I even write the check. No problems, no disputes, nothing." I saw the color drain from Mark's face. He knew the paper I had signed was a fraud. He knew he couldn't produce a clean title. He walked the man to the door and shook his hand, but his smile was stretched and fake. The moment the door closed, he turned to Sarah, his eyes wide with pure terror. His quick cash solution had just hit a brick wall, and his panic was about to explode into pure rage. That night, the whispers in the house turned into shouting. I sat in my room with the door closed, but I could hear every word. My son's wife, Sarah, was screaming at him. "A clean title? You promised me this would be easy, Mark. You promised." My son Mark shouted right back, his voice cracking with fear. "What do you want from me? I owe people money. Dangerous people. This was supposed to fix everything." Then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of a glass shattering against a wall. A moment later, my door creaked open. It was my granddaughter, Chloe, her little face pale and her eyes wide with fear. She ran to me and buried her face in my chest, her whole body trembling. I held her tight and whispered that everything was going to be okay. I was her grandpa, and I would always keep her safe. But as I listened to the ugly, hateful words they were screaming at each other in the hallway, I knew I was only telling her half the truth. I could keep her safe. But for her parents, it was already far, far too late. The next morning, the house was quiet. It was a scary, heavy kind of quiet. I was in the kitchen when my son Mark walked in. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. All the anger was gone from his face. Now he just looked pathetic and broken. He slumped into a chair across from me. "Dad," he said, his voice hoarse, "I'm sorry about the noise. We're just under a lot of pressure." He stared at his hands for a long moment. "Dad, listen. Is there anything else? Any old savings bonds Mom might have hidden away? Anything at all? I just need a small loan just until the house sells." This was it. His last move. He was finally admitting he had failed. I held all the power, but my face showed him nothing but sadness. I looked my desperate, broken son right in the eye. "There's nothing left, son," I said, my voice full of fake despair. "You've taken it all." The last bit of hope drained from his face, leaving him looking empty and hollow. He thought he had finally hit rock bottom. He had no idea the ground was about to open up beneath him, because my lawyer, Mr. Davis, was finally ready to make his move. Watching my son Mark slump out of the room, a completely defeated man, I felt a small, painful flicker of pity for him. For a moment, he looked like the little boy I used to tuck into bed. But then, a memory popped into my head, as clear as day. It was a warm summer evening a few years ago. My wife, Helen, and I were sitting in the backyard watching our little granddaughter, Chloe, chase fireflies. Helen put her hand on mine. She has your strength, Arthur, she said quietly. But she has his weakness in her blood, too. Promise me you'll always protect her. Promise me you will be her rock no matter what happens. Of course, my love, I said, kissing her hand. I promise. I thought it was just words back then. But now I understood. Helen knew a storm was coming, and she was trusting me to be the anchor. That memory washed away all the pity I felt for Mark. My promise to my wife was more important than my son's self-made misery. As I looked at the calendar on the wall, I knew the storm she predicted was finally about to hit. It was Thursday, the day before the bank auction of my son Mark's house. The anger and shouting were gone. Now the house was filled with a thick, heavy silence that was almost worse. Mark and his wife Sarah moved around like ghosts, barely looking at each other. He just stared out the front window. She was packing some clothes into a suitcase, but slowly, like she had no hope left. They had given up. While they were drowning in their own misery, I was getting ready for battle. I got a text on my secret phone from my neighbor Frank. It just said, "All set on my end." Then, the lawyer, Mr. Davis, called me. "The papers are all filed with the court, Arthur," he said, his voice calm. "The server has his instructions. He will arrive at your house tomorrow at exactly 10:05 a.m. Are you ready?" "I'm ready," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. I looked over at my granddaughter, Chloe, who was at the kitchen table drawing a picture of a smiling sun, with no idea of the storm that was coming. The trap was set. All we had to do was wait for the clock to strike 10. Friday morning, D-Day. The air in the house felt so thick I could barely breathe. My son Mark stood on the front porch, pacing back and forth with his phone clutched in his hand. His wife Sarah watched him from the window, her face a mess of fear. I just sat at the kitchen table with Chloe, trying to act normal, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. The little clock on the wall ticked to 10 a.m. Right on time. Mark's phone began to ring. I watched through the window as he stopped pacing and answered it. I saw his whole body go stiff. The color drained from his face, and his shoulders collapsed as if the weight of the world had just landed on them. He didn't say a word. He just lowered the phone. He stumbled back into the house, his eyes empty. "It's over," he mumbled to Sarah. "It's all gone." He thought the worst thing that could possibly happen to him had just happened. He thought he had hit the bottom. He had no idea that his nightmare was just beginning, because at that very moment, our doorbell rang. My son Mark was still standing in the middle of the living room, completely stunned from the phone call with the bank. His wife Sarah was staring at him, her mouth hanging open. The doorbell rang again, sharp and loud. Numbly, like he was in a dream, Mark walked to the door and opened it. A man in a simple gray suit was standing on our porch. He wasn't selling anything. He was holding a big, thick envelope. "Are you Mark Holloway?" the man asked, his voice polite but firm. Mark just nodded. "You've been served," the man said, and he pushed the envelope into Mark's hand, turned around, and walked away. Mark just stood there, holding the envelope like it was a snake. Sarah rushed over to him, and together they tore it open. I watched from the doorway as they pulled out the papers. I saw their faces change from confusion to disbelief, and then to pure, horrified shock. They looked up from the papers, their eyes wide with terror, and they stared right at me. They finally understood. The game was over, and they had lost. They stared at the legal papers in their hands, their faces as white as sheets. It was all there in black and white, impossible to deny. The first page was a copy of my wife Helen's real will, the one that left everything to me. Then there was the part about our son, Mark. It said he was to get exactly $1, $1 single dollar. Next was the official eviction notice. It said that Mark and Sarah Holloway were no longer legal residents and that they had 48 hours to leave my property. The last page was the most important. It was a temporary restraining order, signed by a judge, forbidding them from coming within 500 feet of me or their daughter, my granddaughter Chloe. "What is this?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling as she looked at Mark. "What did you do?" Mark just kept shaking his head, reading the line about the $1 over and over again. The shock on his face slowly began to curdle, twisting into something dark and ugly. His eyes finally lifted from the page and met mine. They weren't empty anymore, they were filled with pure boiling rage. My son, Mark, stormed toward me, waving the crumpled papers in my face. His face was red and twisted with anger. "What did you do?" he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You old fool! Did you forge this? You've been pretending this whole time. You're trying to ruin me." The weak, frail old man he had been bullying for months was gone. I stood up straight and looked my son right in the eye, my own voice coming out clear and strong. "No, son," I said calmly. "I didn't do this. Your mother did. This is her final lesson. A lesson about consequences." My calmness only made him angrier. "I'll kill you!" he shouted, and he raised his hand, the papers clenched in his fist. For a second, a dark, terrible second, I thought he was actually going to hit me. But just as he lunged forward, the front door, which had been left open, swung wide. My neighbor Frank, the retired detective, was standing right there on the porch. He was a big man, and he wasn't smiling. "Is there a problem here, Mark?" he asked, his voice as calm and as heavy as a stone. My son Mark stood frozen, staring at my neighbor Frank, who now stood in our doorway. Frank, the retired detective, didn't move a muscle. He just watched. Mark's raised hand slowly fell to his side. All the fight seemed to drain out of him. I was no longer afraid, and my voice was cold and clear. "It's a lesson about consequences, Mark," I said again, "and I have proof of every single one of your mistakes." I started listing them off, one by one. "I know about your gambling debts. I know the bank took your house this morning. I know you sold my car, the one your mother loved, to buy yourself a new watch." I pointed a finger toward Frank's house. "We have videos, Mark. We have a recording of your wife, Sarah, telling her friends she was going to dig up your mother's rose garden to put in a pool. We have the nursing home brochure she left by my bed." With every word, my son seemed to shrink. All his anger, all his excuses, crumbled into nothing. He was completely and totally exposed. He wasn't a monster anymore. He was just a small, pathetic man who had burned his own life to the ground. He sank down onto the stairs, put his face in his hands, and began to sob. And that's when his wife, Sarah, showed her true colors. My son, Mark, was crying like a child, but his wife, Sarah, didn't go to comfort him. She didn't look sad or ashamed. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. She turned on her husband, her voice a poisonous hiss. "You idiot!" she screamed at him. "You absolute failure! I knew you couldn't do it. You've ruined everything. My life is ruined because of you." She didn't waste another second. She ran up the stairs, and I could hear her throwing things around. A minute later, she came back down, dragging 2 big suitcases behind her. She didn't even glance at me or at the closed door of her own daughter's bedroom. She was a rat leaving a sinking ship. At the front door, she stopped and looked back at her crying husband. "I hope you rot in the gutter," she spat. Then she was gone, slamming the door so hard that a picture of our family on the wall rattled. And just like that, the life that my son had built on a foundation of lies and greed completely fell apart. After his wife, Sarah, slammed the door, a deep, empty silence filled the house. My son, Mark, was still on the stairs, his shoulders shaking. My neighbor Frank took a quiet step inside and stood beside me. His presence gave me strength. I looked at the broken man who was my son. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a great heavy sadness. "The papers say you have 48 hours, Mark," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But I think it's better if you just go now." He didn't fight. He didn't even look at me. He just stood up, went into the living room, and put a few small things into a backpack. He walked to the door, then stopped. He looked at me, his eyes red and empty. Then his gaze drifted to Chloe's bedroom door. He stood there for a long moment. Then he turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. My neighbor Frank put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Arthur," he said. "It's over." And it was. The house was quiet. It was mine. But as I looked at that little white door, I knew my fight wasn't truly over. Now came the hardest part of all. I had to explain to my sweet 7-year-old granddaughter that her mommy and daddy were gone. After my neighbor Frank left, I took a deep breath and knocked on my granddaughter Chloe's bedroom door. She had been in there the whole time, hiding from the awful sounds of the fight. I found her sitting on her bed, hugging her stuffed bear. I sat down next to her. "Sweetheart," I started, my voice soft. "You know how Mommy and Daddy have been arguing a lot lately?" She nodded, her little chin trembling. "Are they mad at me?" she whispered. That question broke my heart. "Oh no, sweetie," I said, pulling her into a hug. "Never, ever at you. Sometimes grown-ups have big, difficult problems they need to fix, and they have to go live somewhere else to do it." She looked up at me, her eyes full of fear. "Does that mean I have to leave Grandma's house?" "No," I said, holding her tight. "You are staying right here with me. This is your home now. This will always be your safe place." She laid her head on my shoulder, and I could feel her little body relax. She was safe, and for that moment it was enough. But as I held her, I wondered how you begin to heal a little heart that had already seen so much ugliness. Where in the world was I supposed to start? That night I decided we needed something normal. I went into the kitchen, my kitchen, and cooked Chloe's favorite dinner, spaghetti and meatballs. The house felt different. The air wasn't heavy with fear and anger anymore. It felt light. It felt clean. For the first time in months, I could breathe. We sat at the big dining room table, a place I had been avoiding for weeks because it was where my son's wife, Sarah, used to sit and make her cruel plans. Chloe ate 2 whole helpings. "This is the best spaghetti ever, Grandpa," she said with a big smile. Later, after I tucked her into bed, I walked through the quiet, sleeping house. I ran my hand along the back of my wife Helen's favorite armchair. I looked at the photos on the wall. It was my home again. It felt like I had woken up from a very long and very bad dream. I looked at a picture of Helen and me on our wedding day. "We did it, my love," I whispered. "She's safe." I stood there for a long time, just breathing in the peace. The war was over. But to truly close the door on the past, I knew there was one important thing I had to do first thing in the morning. I had to change the locks. The next morning I called a locksmith. He was a friendly young man with kind eyes. While he worked drilling out the old locks, Chloe and I sat on the front porch steps. The sound was loud, a final screaming noise that felt like it was chasing all the bad memories out of the house for good. When he was done, he handed me 2 brand new, shiny keys. They felt solid and strong in my hand. "You're all set, sir," the locksmith said, packing up his tools. "Nobody's getting in without one of these." I looked down at Chloe, who was watching everything with her big, curious eyes. "Thank you," I said to the man. "That's all I ever wanted." I gave one of the new keys to Chloe. "This is a special key, sweetheart," I told her. "It means we're safe now." As she held her new key, her face full of pride, I finally felt like the master of my own home again. The doors were locked, and the monsters were gone, but I knew they were still out there somewhere, and I wondered how long it would be before one of them tried to come knocking. In the days that followed, the phone started ringing. It was my sister, then my late wife Helen's brother, then a cousin from out of state. They had all gotten a frantic, crying phone call from my son's wife, Sarah. She had told them a wild story about how I had lost my mind with grief and thrown my own son out onto the street for no reason. At first I tried to explain, but then I realized it didn't matter. I found a simple answer that worked just fine. My sister Jean called, her voice full of worry. "Arthur, what on earth is going on? Sarah said you kicked them out." I took a deep breath. "Jean," I said calmly, "there are things you don't know. My son, Mark, has a very serious problem, and he put his own daughter in danger. I am taking care of my granddaughter, Chloe, now. That is all that matters." After the 3rd phone call, I just stopped answering. Let them gossip. Let them believe the lies. My family wasn't on the phone. My family was the little girl who was sleeping safely down the hall. But as I looked around at all the empty spaces where our family heirlooms used to be, I knew it was time to bring our memories home. I called my neighbor Frank, my good and true friend, and he brought his pickup truck over. We spent the whole day driving back and forth from the storage unit carrying boxes and furniture. It was hard work on my old back, but every box we brought inside felt like a victory. It felt like I was putting the broken pieces of my life back together. The last thing we brought in was the small wooden music box. I polished it carefully with a soft cloth and placed it right back in its spot on the fireplace mantel. When Chloe came home from school, the first thing she saw was the music box. Her face lit up with a huge, beautiful smile. "The ballerina!" she shouted. "She came back from her adventure." "Yes, she did, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "She's home for good now." Chloe wound it up, and the sweet, gentle music filled the house. That night, with our treasures back where they belonged, the house finally felt like our home again. It felt like Helen's home. I thought we could finally rest. But then Chloe found a can of yellow paint in the garage, and I knew our next big project was just beginning. The old guest room was dark and sad. It wasn't a room for a little girl. So Chloe and I decided to make it her own special place. First, I met with the lawyer, Mr. Davis. He started the paperwork to make me Chloe's official legal guardian. He said with her father, Mark, in so much trouble and her mother, Sarah, having abandoned her, the judge would approve it easily. That weekend, Chloe and I went to the hardware store. She picked out the paint color herself. "Are you sure about this one?" I asked, looking at the bright, sunny yellow. "It's very yellow." "It's a happy color, Grandpa," she said, and that was that. We spent the whole weekend painting. We got paint on our clothes and on our faces, and we laughed more than I had laughed in a year. We were not just painting a room. We were building a new life, a happy life, right on top of the old, sad one. We finished on a Sunday. The room was perfect. But when I went to get the mail, I saw a letter in the box with my son Mark's handwriting on it. My heart sank. I thought the war was over, but I had a terrible feeling a new battle was about to begin. I stood in the kitchen for a long time just holding the letter from my son Mark. I was afraid to open it. I waited until my granddaughter Chloe was fast asleep, and then I sat down and slit the envelope open. The letter wasn't angry. It was just sad. Mark wrote that his wife, Sarah, had left him for good. He was living in a cheap one-room apartment across town and working a job loading trucks. He said he had hit the bottom and had finally started going to meetings for people with gambling problems. Most of the letter was him feeling sorry for himself, full of excuses about his sickness. I felt my old anger start to bubble up, but then I got to the last paragraph. "I know I ruined everything, Dad," he wrote. "I am sorry for all the trouble I caused." It wasn't much of an apology for the hell he had put us through, but it was the first time in his adult life he had ever said he was sorry for anything. Then came the final sentence. He asked if he could please see Chloe. Just for an hour, in a public park. My first thought was, no way. But then I thought of Chloe. Could I really keep a father from seeing his little girl? After a week of wrestling with my heart, I agreed to the visit. My neighbor Frank came with me just in case. He sat on a bench a little ways away, pretending to read the newspaper. Mark was already there, sitting on a different bench, looking thin and tired. All the fancy clothes were gone. He just looked small. My granddaughter Chloe was shy and hid behind my legs. Mark didn't rush her. He just sat there and waited. "Hi, sweetie," he said, his voice quiet. "I missed you." Finally, Chloe took a few steps toward him. He didn't make excuses or talk about grown-up stuff. He just asked her about school. He pulled a small, clumsy-looking wooden bird from his pocket. "I made this for you," he said. Chloe took it. She showed him a drawing she had made in class, and then I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Real tears started to run down my son's face. He didn't make a sound. He just cried. The visit wasn't a happy reunion. It was just something new. And as we walked away, I had no idea what it meant for our future. The next week I went to see the lawyer, Mr. Davis. He was smiling. He told me that with all the evidence my neighbor Frank and I had gathered, the judge had easily approved my right to use Helen's special fund for Chloe. He showed me the paperwork. My wife Helen had been so smart. She had left behind a lifeboat just for her granddaughter. I knew exactly what I needed to do first. Chloe loved to draw and paint more than anything, but her school barely had an art class. There was a better school in the next town over, one famous for its art program. That afternoon I asked her, "Sweetheart, how would you like to go to a new school, with a giant art room full of all the paint you could ever want?" Her face lit up like the 4th of July. Watching her walk into her first art class a week later, her eyes wide with wonder, I felt a deep, peaceful joy. Helen's plan had worked. Chloe's future was safe. That night, feeling happy, I was looking through an old photo album and saw a picture of Helen with Sarah's mother. I had forgotten all about her. I wondered, did she have any idea what kind of monster her daughter had become? Life started to feel normal again, but it was a new kind of normal. My neighbor Frank, the retired detective, became more than just a friend. He became family. Every morning he'd come over and we'd sit on the porch with our coffee, just watching the world wake up. He helped me fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen, and he taught my granddaughter Chloe how to play checkers. She beat him most of the time. One morning I tried to thank him again for everything he had done for us. "Frank, I mean it," I said. "I couldn't have gotten through this without you." He just waved his hand and took a sip of his coffee. "Forget it, Arthur," he said. "Helen was a good woman. I wasn't going to let that boy of yours tear down everything she built." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then he cleared his throat. "You should know," he said. "One of my old cop buddies told me that your son's ex-wife, Sarah, she's not living with her mother. She's moved in with some rich fella over in the next county." The news didn't hurt me, but it made me wonder. Did this new man have any idea what kind of viper he was letting into his home? Our days settled into a quiet, happy rhythm. I would wake up early and make pancakes for Chloe. I'd walk her to the school bus stop and be there waiting for her in the afternoon. We'd do her homework at the big kitchen table, and some nights we'd bake cookies, filling the house with the warm, sweet smell of chocolate chips. I was a father all over again at 70 years old. It was tiring work for these old bones, but it was the best work I had ever done. The house was no longer a silent, sad place. It was filled with Chloe's laughter and the sound of her little feet running down the hall. I wasn't just an old man waiting for his life to be over anymore. I had a purpose. I had my little girl to take care of. One afternoon, Chloe was drawing a picture of our house. She drew me and her and my wife Helen's rose bushes. But then she drew 2 tiny figures walking away down the street. "Who are they, sweetheart?" I asked. "That's Mommy and Daddy," she said, not looking up from her crayons. "They're on their long time out." It showed me she was healing, but it also told me a piece of her was still broken. And I wondered if it was something I could ever truly fix. One evening, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered it anyway. My blood ran cold when I heard the voice on the other end. It was Sarah, my son's ex-wife. Her voice was syrupy sweet, a voice I knew was full of poison. "Arthur," she said, "it's Sarah. I know we had our troubles, but I've been thinking about you and dear little Chloe." I cut her off. "What do you want, Sarah?" I asked, my own voice flat and hard. The sweetness in her voice vanished. "Well, things are a little tight right now," she whined. "I thought maybe for Chloe's sake you could help me out with a little money." "No," I said. Her voice turned ugly. "This is all your fault," she shrieked. "If you had just given us the house, none of this would have happened. You ruined my life." I didn't say another word. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just quietly hung up the phone. Then I blocked her number. I felt nothing for her. No anger, no pity, nothing. Her chapter in our lives was over. I thought all the ghosts of the past were finally gone. But I was wrong. The ghost of my son, Mark, was about to return in a way I never, ever expected. A few weeks later, I was in Mr. Davis's office, signing the last of the guardianship papers for my granddaughter, Chloe. The lawyer told me there was just one final piece of business to take care of to close out my wife Helen's will. He pulled out a business checkbook from his desk drawer. "It's time to pay your son his inheritance," he said. I must have looked confused because he gave me a small, sad smile. His full inheritance, he said. All $1 of it. He carefully wrote the check out to Mark Holloway for the amount of 1.0. He put it in a special envelope for certified mail, so we would have legal proof that Mark received it. I stared at that little piece of paper. $1. It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was just the sad and simple truth. It was the final price my son paid for all his lies and his greed. Mr. Davis sealed the envelope. It felt like closing the cover on a long, terrible book. I thought that would be the end of it, the last time I'd have to worry about my son's problems. But a phone call I received a few weeks later proved that his story was not over yet. We celebrated Chloe's 8th birthday in the backyard. The house was filled with the happy sounds of little girls laughing. It wasn't a big fancy party like my son's wife Sarah would have thrown. It was a small party, with just my neighbor Frank, a few of Chloe's new friends from her art class, and me. We had hot dogs and a big chocolate cake with 8 candles on it. As Chloe got ready to blow them out, her face glowing in the candlelight, she looked over at me. "You have to make a wish too, Grandpa," she said. I looked at her happy, innocent face and I smiled. "I don't need to, sweetheart," I told her. "My wish already came true." This was my victory. This moment. It wasn't about the house or the money. It was about this little girl's smile. As the party was winding down, the phone in the kitchen rang. I went inside to answer it. It was the principal from Chloe's new school, and her voice was very serious. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "we had an incident today. A man came to the school trying to see Chloe. He said he was her father." My heart hammered in my chest. I arranged to meet my son Mark at the park the next day. This time, I was filled with cold rage. My neighbor Frank came with me and stood a few feet away just watching. "What were you thinking?" I demanded as Mark approached. "Going to her school? You broke the rules, Mark. You scared the teachers, and you could have scared her." He looked ashamed, his eyes fixed on the ground. He didn't make excuses. "I know, Dad. I'm so sorry. I wasn't thinking. I just wanted to show her something." He held out his hand. In his palm was a small, cheap plastic token like a poker chip. On it were the number 90 and the word days. "I got my 90-day sober chip from my meetings," he said, his voice cracking. "I've been clean for 3 months. I was proud." I stared at the little chip, and all the anger inside me got tangled up with a feeling I couldn't name. His decision was selfish and stupid. But the reason for it? It was the first thing he had done for someone other than himself in years. "You don't do that again," I said, my voice like steel. "You call me first, do you understand?" He nodded, tears in his eyes. And for the first time I didn't know if I was looking at a con man or at my son, finally trying to find his way home. The seasons began to change. My son Mark kept going to his meetings. He kept his simple job loading trucks. And every single Saturday, he showed up at the park to see his daughter, my granddaughter Chloe. He never asked for money. He never complained. He just showed up. He would bring her little things he had carved out of wood on his lunch breaks, a tiny dog, a lopsided star. I watched him from a distance, my heart a tangle of old wounds and new hope. I still don't know if I can ever truly forgive him for the pain he caused, for the way he broke his mother's heart. But I saw him changing. The frantic, hungry look in his eyes was gone. He was quieter. He was sadder. But he was there. One day he called me, his voice nervous. "Dad," he said, "Chloe's school is having a father-daughter dance next month. I was wondering if you think it would be okay for me to take her." The question hung in the air. Could I trust him to take care of her even for just one night? I decided to trust him. It was a risk, but it felt like the right one. I helped Chloe pick out a pretty blue dress. She was so excited she could barely stand still. When my son Mark arrived at the door, he was wearing a clean, rented suit. He looked nervous, but his eyes were clear. I watched them drive off, and then I sat in my quiet house. But the house didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. It was a sanctuary, filled with Chloe's bright paintings on the wall and the warm, loving memory of my wife, Helen. I finally understood her plan. It wasn't just to punish Mark. It was to burn his old broken life down so that maybe, just maybe, something new and better could grow in its place. I finally let go of the last of my anger. Later that night, Mark brought a sleepy, happy Chloe home. At the door, he looked at me, his eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you, Dad," he said, "for everything." "She had a good time, son," I replied. "That's all that matters." Our life was finally peaceful. I thought there were no more secrets. But my Helen always had one last surprise. Months later, on a sunny Saturday morning, Chloe and I were out in the backyard. We were finally planting the little vegetable garden that my wife Helen and I had always talked about. As I was digging in the soft dirt, my shovel hit something hard. It wasn't a rock. I dug around it and pulled out a small heavy metal box, rusted with age. Taped to the bottom was a little plastic bag. Inside was an old brass key and a folded note in Helen's handwriting. "My dearest Arthur," the note read, "if you are reading this, it means our garden is finally growing. This isn't about trouble or money. It's about our beginning. I buried it years ago. Think of it as a little adventure, for whenever you're ready to start a new one." My granddaughter Chloe came running over, her eyes wide with wonder. "What is it, Grandpa?" she asked, tugging on my sleeve. "What's inside the treasure box?" I looked at the key, then at the box, and then at her beautiful, curious face. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I smiled, a real happy smile. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said, "but it looks like your grandma left us one last story to uncover together."